Hi, I'm Johnny, and today I'm going to show you how to use Spotify's API with React. There are a lot of really fun things you can do with the API, but just to get you started, I'm going to show you something really simple. We're going to make an app that tells us what song is currently playing on our Spotify. So before we do anything, play a song. Go on your Spotify app, on your phone or on your desktop or whatever, even the web app that's available, and play any song you want. I'm gonna play Cake Push by Lupe Fiasco and pause it. Once you have the song playing or paused, just leave it as is. Just make sure you don't close the app, because we're gonna make our web app basically make an API call to tell us what song is currently playing or paused. Now for this tutorial, I'm assuming that you're familiar with JavaScript, with the basics of React and Node and Express, and making API calls. I'm going to provide the repository in the description just in case you're stuck and you want to compare some code. And also I'll provide a link to an article I wrote on Medium that goes through each of these steps. So once you're set up, let's get started. First thing we want to do is actually create an app. So let's go to My Apps, and we'll create an app. You can call it whatever you want. So I'll call it Spotify API Intro. Describe it the same way. And here there are three really important pieces of information that we need. One is the client ID, two is a client secret, and three is a redirect URI. And redirect URI is where we want the user to be sent back after they've been authenticated, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So we'll do localhost 8888 callback, and I want you to copy down these three pieces of information. Okay, so save it, and then once you have that done, we can start getting into the code. But before we do that, actually, it's important for us to understand what's going to happen. So luckily, Spotify's API is very well documented, and they talk about exactly how the authorization happens in this document here called authorization code, the authorization guide. Here it mentions that there are three types of authorization flows that Spotify supports. There's the authorization code, the client credentials, and the implicit grant. The only one that we're concerned with today is the authorization code. And they provide a really nice diagram that describes every single step that is involved in it. If you've ever used an app that asks you to log in with Google or log in with Facebook or log in with GitHub, it uses OAuth or OAuth 2.0. And that's exactly what Spotify uses as well for its authorization flow. So first, your app sends the user to Spotify's account service where they log in. Once they've logged in, they get sent back to your app with a code. And then that code is then exchanged for an access token, and that access token is then used to make API requests. And when we see the code itself, it'll make a lot more sense. So let's do that. I did a few steps ahead of time just because they involve some waiting, and I don't want to do too much editing, but I'll explain everything that I did. The first thing I did that I want you to do is create a folder called Spotify API Intro, or honestly name it whatever you want. And here there will be two parts, the server and the client. For this part, first we're only going to be concerned with the server side. So I want you to go to Spotify's developer site and go to code example and libraries, and then go to example app code. Here you'll find a repository with some example code provided by a Spotify developer, Jose Manuel Perez, and you can use that in order to create the server code for the authentication so that you don't have to write it all yourself. So let's clone it. I've already done it, but I'll show you exactly what I did so you can do it yourself. Basically, you'll want to do git clone, the name of the repository, and then you'll want to name it, let's move this out of the way, auth server. And then once you've done that, navigate into it and do npm install to install all of the dependencies as node modules. Once that's done, it should be ready. To make sure it works okay, you can do node authorization code app.js, because that's the only one we're concerned with. You'll notice that the folder has 3 parts to it: authorization code, client credentials, and implicit grant. As I mentioned, the only one we're going to be using today is authorization code. And here there's the app.js server file with all the code that we need to get authenticated, and a public folder with the actual HTML. I'm not going to go through the app.js code line by line, but if you take your time to look through it, you'll notice that everything here corresponds exactly to the diagram that we were looking at before in the authorization guide. You get sent to Spotify's account services, you get logged in. Once you get logged in, the server makes a request to get an access token, and that access token is then available to make API requests. So let's run it to make sure it's working okay. And then we'll visit localhost 8888. And here we have it. We'll do login to Spotify. Oh, there's a step that I completely forgot. There's a reason why we copied that stuff earlier. It's because we need to paste it in here. So let's kill the server and go back up to client ID, client secret, and redirect URI. This is the stuff we copied a few minutes ago. And now we want to paste it in here. And don't bother using mine because I'm going to refresh them as soon as this tutorial is over. Here. Okay. All right, let's try this again. Cool. You get logged in with Spotify, and once we're in there, we'll get back to our page. And in the query string will be the access token along with some other information like the refresh token, and that will be used for our front-end application to make requests. And this is exactly what they did. If you look at the index.html, there's code near the bottom that parses through the query string, returns an object, and then that object is then used to make an AJAX request to Spotify's API to get information about my account, and that's where this information comes from. Okay, and what they did there is exactly what we want to do with our React app. So the next step will be for us to make a React app. If you haven't already, install create React app globally on your machine, and then once you've installed it, create a React app by running create React app client, and it should take some time. I've already done it, so I'm not going to do it, but it should give you a folder like this, and you might have to do npm install in order to install the node dependencies. But before you do that, go into the package.json and add this line right here. This is a Spotify web API library provided by Spotify. It's going to make our life easier because yes, technically we could make all of the API requests manually by writing the HTTP request, but it's nice to have a library that abstracts all of that for us. And if we go back to code examples, one of the libraries that is listed is the one that I just mentioned here. And it makes a lot of things much easier for us because making API requests at Spotify is as easy as just calling the function that you need. And we'll get into how to use it in a bit. Once you have it installed, Navigate to it. Make sure you've installed the node dependencies if necessary, and do npm start. And basically, after some time, it should be ready and listening on localhost 3000. Let's give it some time. We don't need Chrome. There we go. Okay. So that's perfect, exactly what we need. But this is not the HTML that we need. So what we're going to put instead is a button that takes us to our other app for us to get logged in. So let's go back to our code. And here, what we want to do is open the source folder, go to app.js, get rid of all this, and instead put a button log in with Spotify. Oh, with an A tag, of course. That takes us to our other app. And just to make sure things don't stick to the top of the page, in the app.css, we'll just add a little rule here so that the divs and the buttons get some space around them. Okay. Yeah, don't worry about this linting stuff. I know I can get rid of the logo. It's not necessary. All right. Cool. Let's see what we got. Press login. Perfect. All right. So now we're here. Do not press login yet because there's a couple things we need to change in our server code. Let's go back to our server code, the big app.js file. And near the bottom is the part that redirects us back to the root page after we've been authenticated and we have an access token. Instead of going back to the root page of the server app, we want to go back to the client app. So let's change this to localhost 3000, which is our React app, and the rest will stay the same. And there's one more thing we need to change, and this is with regards to scope. Scope is basically the set of permissions that your app is requesting from Spotify in terms of what they're allowed to do with your account. And if we go back up to where scope is, we can see where our app should be allowed to read the user information and read our email. There's one more we need in there. It's called user read playback state, I think. Let me double check to make sure. So web API, scopes, and user read playback. Yeah, exactly, perfect. User read playback state. Once we have that, we can restart the server to make sure it's working fine. And we'll go through the same process that we did before. But what should happen this time is that after getting logged in, we should end up back at our React app with all of the access token information in the query string. So let's try it. Oh, is it not running? What's going on? clearly missing something here. Oh, I see. Typo. There was a typo. I forgot to put an L. Okay. Let's try this one more time. Okay, perfect. All right. So now that we have the access token, we want our app to be able to use it. So for that to happen, we need to go back to our code. And in the index.html of the server code that we were provided by Spotify, they have a nice function called getHashParams. This is the one that we're going to be using. And in our app.js, we're going to define it and get its return value saved into a constant in our constructor. Okay, and basically this will give us an object that has access token and refresh token, and basically we also want to define the information that we'll be using. So here, like I said, we'll be getting the song name as well as the album art. So let's make a div called now playing, and we'll do this dot state dot now playing name. Of course, there's no state yet. I'm going to define it in just a second. And here we'll do the image tag. This dot state dot now playing dot image. And we will close it off. Oh, actually, we should actually restrict the size. So we'll do style. Okay. So we'll set initial state. First, we'll make one for if they're logged in or not. Logged in. And here we want to make this conditional. So we'll make it if params dot access token true, otherwise it's false. And we also want a now playing, which has a name of not checked because we haven't checked it yet, and image right now is an empty string. Let's check to make sure everything's still okay. Oh, this is not allowed before super. That's right. React 101. Cool. All right. So now we need to make a button that's going to go ahead and check the now playing song and update the state accordingly. Button. click. We'll call a function called getNowPlaying, which we haven't defined yet. Cool. All right. So now let's call this dot getNowPlaying. Now, oh, what am I doing? getNowPlaying. Okay. getNowPlaying is going to use the library that I talked about earlier. If we go back to the documentation for this JavaScript library, there's an introduction here in the documentation, in the README, about how to first initialize it. And in the actual source file itself, we can find all the functions. It's very well documented and commented. So whatever method you need for whatever API call you might want to make, for example, reordering songs or adding new playlists, you'll find all the functions you will need in the source code. But first, let's initialize it. So we'll do it the way they did it here. So we'll do const Spotify equal, or actually, there we go. Okay. And then because it's a class, we have to instantiate it. Const Spotify web API. Ooh. Okay. And here, if there is an access token available, so if params access token, we will set the access token within the Spotify web API object because it's necessary for it to make requests. So Spotify set access token. And this makes it really convenient because that way we don't have to add the access token every time we make a request. The library stores it once and just keeps it for as long as you need until you refresh it, if you refresh it. So set access token, and we will set to params access token. And I know we could abstract this into a variable, but we just want to get through this for now. Okay, should be good like that. And here in getNowPlaying, we'll use the same library. So Spotify or API, and we'll use one of the methods called, actually, let's look at it together. Here in the source code, we need something that tells us what's currently playing. So I know already it's called getMyCurrentPlayStatus. Playback state, sorry. But whatever you need to do with the API, it's really easy to look through all the functions and find very specifics about how to call it and what kind of parameters to pass in. Get my current playback state. And because it's going to be a promise, we want to do .then. And with the return value, the response, we want to set state. Now, you'll notice in the way I said state, I already know what the response object is going to look like, so I know how to access it. But I really recommend that you take some time to look through the response object, either by console logging it or by looking at your network tab so you could see everything that's being returned, because there's a lot of useful information that you could use. So here we want now playing will be name response dot item. Nope. Oh. Name and image will be response dot item dot album dot images 0. Once again, because I know the structure of the object, that's why I know what to access. But we'll take a look at the whole object together so we can see everything that it gives us. .url. Okay, so let's try this out. Oh, there we go. Okay, now playing kick push. It's working fine. And just so you guys can see what's going on, we'll open up the network tab and see the response object from that request, wherever it is. No, where it is. There we go. Okay. So here's the entire response we got from Spotify telling us about the current playing. There's the device that we're on. Shuffle state is playing false because I have it paused, and the item. So everything about the song itself that's being played. So that's it. I'm going to provide the code through links in the description. This is the most simple thing you could do with the Spotify API, but there's a ton of things you could do. If you want to get inspired, you can go to the Spotify Developer Showcase, and they have some really amazing things that some developers have done with the API. My absolute favorite is the 6 degrees of Kanye West, where you can see the degrees of separation between any artist you can think of and Kanye West. And let me know if you have any questions, and if you prefer to have the code given to you step by step. I wrote an article on Medium that goes through all the steps that we just went through here. And yeah, just give me some feedback. Let me know if you enjoy this. I want to keep making more videos about cool things you could do with APIs. And that's it. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it. Yeah.